I guess most of us, when we think about the whole idea of the internet and how it relates to us, we see it as only an oppositional construct. That is to say that it is, or it appears to be against the establishment. But I don't think that is a right way of seeing the internet, because what you need to do when you look at the internet and ask yourself, why does it have such an entrenched oppositional bent, is to look at the whole social and cultural history that goes with the internet. And you can't take a presenter's view and say that, well, technology has basically emboldened us because the internet has provided us with the power of being anonymous, and that means that we are emboldened and we will say the things that we would say which we would not usually say. I don't think that idea or even concept is very robust. And the reason why I say that is because when I started the game in the Brotherhood, it was a game that basically coursed through many periods, and one of the most trying periods of the Brotherhood was the Age of Stone. And the Age of Stone basically was the dawn of man. It was basically an age that was characterized by resource scarcity, and the aperture of opportunities were very, very restricted. And against that kind of backdrop, you're really only focused on one thing: survival. And survival in a primitive sense basically boils down to only a few elements: food, warmth, and shelter. And when society is basically focused on just survival, it has basically no time to basically actualize the higher ideals of what it means to be a human being, because you're so focused on the act of putting food in your stomach. And this was basically a period whereby many of the gamers who were part of this framework organized themselves into guilds. And if you really want to understand what a guild is, it's basically just a gang. It's just a group of people coming together, and they say that, well, it's good that we stick together because this is a very dangerous world. And since there's no law and order, we're going to create a guild, and the hope is that the guild will protect us, because the guild will provide the structure, that social framework, and that legal or quasi-legal framework. And that would basically be what you refer to as the organizational framework in a primitive society. And in primitive societies, there's no such thing as democracy, because democracy itself is a very wasteful concept when you think about it. Simply because it involves managing conflict, trying your best to get consensus and buy-in, and all these other aspects. And when you're living in a society of resource scarcity, you simply do not have time to go through all these rituals. And in this kind of societies, the gamers would gravitate towards very strong leaders. And this is also something that we saw in our own history in Singapore, because if you look at the period after independence and the period after it, you will find that it was very much a period that was characterized by resource scarcity. There were not really many jobs, and the opportunities available were restricted. And in that kind of environment, it makes sense for the government to take a strong leadership role. But as we progress into the 80s and the 90s, society becomes more affluent. And this was the same thing that basically you saw in the game. And because in the game, when we transitioned from the age of iron to basically the age of the crossbow, what happened was there was a dramatic shift in the perception of people, not only in the way in which they took a very proactive role to define how they wanted the conception of good to be, but they were able to basically modulate that conception of good. And if they did not have the power to modulate it, they would basically assert themselves to make sure that at least they were represented. And this was a very startling discovery for me. It was startling because I began to ask myself, why? Why is it that people actually take an interest in the political framework? Why would they gravitate towards things like democracy, freedom of speech, etc., etc.? And the reason I was I had to actually spend time thinking about it was simply because there were a lot of rebellions during this period, which did not occur during the age of steel, or for that matter the Iron Age. Because during those days, I mean, if there was any trouble, we could send in a garrison of troops and we could sort of like control the situation. And if it really got very rebellious, we could send in just the tanks and shoot a few people. And that was permissible in the age of steel or the Iron Age. But in the age of the crossbow, all these things became unacceptable, because society had reached a point whereby people feel that they have a right to actualize beyond the basic framework of what I refer to as seeking just food, warmth and shelter. They believe that they could play a proactive role in coloring or tempering the society that they lived in. And that itself was a dramatic shift away from the idea of strong leaders, and it signaled the end when society basically gravitated towards strong leaders. And this should prompt us to consider whether perhaps when we look at Singapore today and we ask ourselves, why is the internet characterized by such an oppositional bent? And one reason that accounts for this, undoubtedly, in my opinion, is due to our rising affluence. And the fact that a lot of people, once they have reached a certain standard of living, they feel that they have a right to basically perpetuate that emancipation to the realm of politics. They don't see politics as basically a domain whereby you have one person that's issuing instructions. Very much in a way a captain would basically shout out commands in order to navigate a ship to its next port of call. People do not see politics in that way in a society that is affluent, because in an affluent society, the first thing that occurs is that there is a perceptive shift in the way people actually define the whole political order. They don't see it in terms of one man that is basically issuing instructions. They don't see the leader as a demigod, unlike the age of steel or the Iron Age, where it was natural to actually worship the leader and in certain cases to emulate him. In the age of the crossbow, what happened was the electorate and the political hegemony became very transactional. Transactional in the sense that basically you could even say that politicians were regarded very much as service providers. They were not seen by the masses as people who were intelligent or even exceptional in any way whatsoever. In fact, people saw them as nothing more than purveyors of the good life. And in a sense, the fact that they perceived them in that light basically was a form of reductionism, and it actually took away much of the sheen, that patina of competence, that cult of infallibility, that idea that leaders cannot fail. All these things disappeared, and they disappeared rapidly, only to be replaced by a new order whereby people just believed that they were customers and politicians were in fact people who were elected in order to make sure that they could deliver the goods. And if they did not deliver the goods, then what would happen is that, as you know, every customer would have a right to complain. And you could argue whether this type of complaint is constructive or destructive, or for that matter even whether it served any purpose. But what I'm trying to illustrate here was that the vast majority of gamers who played the game before, during and after the age of the crossbow went through this transition, this awakening, this mental renaissance, whereby they did not longer see politicians as just some kind of elitist group of Brahmins, but rather they saw them as nothing more than technicians who had to deliver the goods if they wanted to be in power. And this is interesting. It is interesting because when we speak about the internet, or when we look at the internet and we ask ourselves, why does it have such an oppositional strain to it? Why is it characterized by so much cynicism and so much skepticism in regards to everything that is churned out by officialdom? Why does it have that slant? We seldom take into account that had it not been for the internet, it could very well be something else. And I believe that even if the internet did not exist, we would still be manifesting all these anxieties and concerns that is regularly found in the internet, simply because society as we know it has become affluent, and affluence itself breeds a sort of emancipated mindset, one whereby not only are we content with the whole idea of just food, shelter, and being able to have 3 square meals, but what we want is control over our destiny, control over how we want to basically lead our lives, and control in the way in which we would like to define work, life, and play. All these things basically boils down to the issue of control. And what we saw in the game, and what I was able to tease out from the social dynamics, was that these emerging voices became more and more vocal. They reached a point whereby it took us to the age of the typewriter, and the age of the typewriter was the age when the Brotherhood was compelled. I would use the word compelled because we were very reluctant to create the idea of a parliament, and that was what happened, a parliament. And this is basically a chronological explanation that provides you with a timeline that will allow you to understand why the internet is basically the way it is. Why does it have this emotional engram? Why does it have this oppositional bent? And why is it that it seeks out to basically criticize the whole idea of officialdom at every turn and opportunity? Unless we understand, unless we are mindful, unless we we take the trouble to look at the history, I don't think that it's possible to understand. And my hope is that this sharing will allow you to get a better understanding of the whole idea of why we are the way we are.